This video contains themes of child abuse and neglect, which may be offensive to some viewers. Daniel Pelka was born on July 15, 2007, in Coventry, England, the son of Polish parents Magdalena Wuchak, a cleaner who later worked as a mail sorter in a parcel force depot, and Eric Pelka, a lorry driver. Wuchak and Pelka had moved to England with her daughter in 2006. Those who knew the couple said that Wuchak was devoted to her son and bought him toys, took him on days out, and loved him deeply. As a result, Daniel seemed very happy and at a healthy weight. The only real concern was that the family seemed to move house quite often due to Wuchak's desire for a larger house. Wuchak and Pelka separated in 2008 after she had an affair. Consequently, Pelka returned to Poland and never saw or heard from Daniel again. Shortly after Wuchak and Pelka's relationship ended, she began dating another Polish man, whose name was Mariusz Kreselek. His previous relationship ended after he found his girlfriend in bed with another man. Sources vary on what Kreselek did for a living. Some sources say he was a plasterer by trade, while others say he was a factory worker. Irrespective of Kreselek's line of work, he was not a good man or boyfriend by any means. He was a very violent and abusive man, who had been excluded from the Polish army after attacking a recruit. His sister, who asked not to be named, recounted how he would beat her when they were children, adding that she would not have allowed her children to be left alone with him. Kreselek had a lengthy criminal history. He had served prison time for driving whilst disqualified in 2006, 2007 and 2008. Kreselek was a wanted man in his native Poland for violating the terms of his suspended sentence for drink driving. Shortly after their relationship began, the couple came to the attention of social services due to domestic violence and Wuchak's ability to protect her children. During the course of their relationship, police were called to the family home on 26 occasions, often due to domestic violence or alcohol abuse concerns. However, Wuchak convinced social services that she was capable of protecting her children from harm, and that there was no cause for concern. Unfortunately, Daniel Pelka was never interviewed about the violence between his mother and stepfather, or how it was affecting him. If only someone had done this, the outcome of today's case could have been very different. Despite his abusive tendencies, Kreselek was invited to move into the family home in 2010. He hated Daniel from the outset of his relationship with Wuchak, describing him to work colleagues as, quote, autistic and, quote, all fucked up, not worth beating as he wouldn't feel anything. There is no evidence that Daniel was autistic, and this was probably a way for Kreselek to justify his hatred and poor treatment of Daniel. While autism can cause delays in speech and language development, Daniel's communication difficulties were because he spoke Polish at home, as did his mother and stepfather, so any communication difficulties were due to his limited understanding of English rather than autism. Shortly after Kreselek moved in, he and Wuchak began drinking heavily, taking amphetamines and smoking cannabis, all at the expense of the two young children in their care. It's not clear exactly when Daniel began to suffer abuse, but it was probably shortly after Kreselek moved into the family home. Kreselek began to abuse Daniel physically. Wuchak, instead of protecting her son, colluded and conspired with Kreselek to ensure that no one outside the family home knew what was happening to Daniel. Furthermore, as we'll discover soon, Wuchak was also engaged in the abuse of her only son. There is no evidence that either of Wuchak's daughters suffered any abuse. This is a clever and manipulative tactic used by abusers to make the victim look like a liar if they try to report abuse. In 2010, a health visitor came to the home and noticed a bruise on Daniel's head. However, Wuchak convinced the health visitor that Daniel simply fell. Unfortunately, getting away with their lies on this occasion may have given the couple the green light to escalate the abuse. On January 5, 2011, Daniel suffered a displaced fracture on his arm. Although it has never been established how the injury was caused, It's likely to have been caused by Kreselek in a fit of rage. Wuchak claimed that Daniel had slid off the back of the settee and onto the floor. However, in court, Kreselek admitted causing the injury, albeit accidentally, in a game of hide and seek. When Wuchak took Daniel to the local emergency department, staff noticed that he was covered in bruises and promptly alerted social services. A doctor, who analysed the injury, admitted that the injury could have been sustained accidentally. During a subsequent appointment, Wuchak, after learning that social services had been informed, was seen to stand over a specialist and shout, quote, "In Poland, when a child breaks his arm, the doctors look at the child, not the parent." At home, Daniel suffered more than just physical abuse. He was locked in his bedroom for long periods of time, the door handle having been removed. Eventually, the handle was adjusted so that he could not even look outside his room to see what was happening. As for the bedroom itself, it was totally plain, with no toys or wallpaper, nothing even remotely child-friendly. His bed was simply a thin mattress on which he was forced to urinate and defecate because he was not allowed to leave the room. The carpet was a threadbare carpet. Daniel started primary school at Little Heath Primary School in September 2011. Initially, there were no concerns, as Daniel was at a healthy weight. Some teachers commented on his limited knowledge of English, but said that he was nonetheless a bright student who tried his best. Daniel's teachers, however, did not know about his home life. It was about the time he started school that the abuse intensified. The assaults worsened, and Wuchak and Kreselek stopped feeding Daniel, i.e., they chose not to feed him. If Daniel was caught taking food from the fridge at home, or even admitted eating something at school, he would be punished by being forced to do squats repeatedly, kneel on the floor for prolonged periods, and run laps around the living room. These punishments were designed to burn any calories he had consumed. The punishments did not stop here. Although Wuchak and Kreselek never explained this next part in court, Daniel's sister testified in court that the two had another punishment. Occasionally, he was subjected to, quote, cold water treatment, where Kreselek would bash Daniel's head against the bath, while Wuchak held him under water until he nearly lost consciousness. In one of the many text exchanges between Wuchak and Kreselek, Wuchak messaged her partner, quote, "He's temporarily unconscious because I nearly drowned him." This chilling text was followed shortly afterwards by an equally disturbing message, quote, "If I hear him whine when he wakes up, then he's going back to the bath. I didn't let the water out." Kreselek responded to these messages, quote, "Take him to the room and lock him there. You'll have some peace. Do wait for me." When Daniel asked for a drink, he would be force-fed salt, prompting him to vomit. The vomiting was not only the body's way of rejecting a poison, but it was also effective in rejecting any food that Daniel might have eaten. Salt poisoning can be incredibly dangerous for adults, but it's especially dangerous for children. The usual cause of death in cases of salt poisoning is as a result of the brain swelling. Only 2 months into his schooling, staff at Daniel's school became concerned. He was found with food in his pockets or stuffed down his trousers. He had also begun stealing food from other children's lunch boxes. The school had a, quote, free fruit tree, and staff had begun to notice that Daniel was taking unusually large amounts of food. When questioned by teachers, Wuchak claimed that Daniel had a rare eating disorder for which he was receiving treatment. Shockingly, she then ordered staff not to give Daniel any food. Complying with Wuchak's orders, the teachers locked away all of the other children's lunch boxes so that he could not get any food. She added that her son had begun raiding the fridge at night and was lashing out at his stepfather if denied food. When social services were informed, they simply recommended that Wuchak give Daniel a snack on the way to school. Welfare officers visited the family home in December 2011 due to concerns about Daniel's attendance rate, which had plummeted to a shocking 63%. That same month, a school nurse visited the house, but Wuchak claimed that her son had, quote, an excessive appetite. Following this claim, She instructed little Heath not to allow Daniel any food in school, aside from his packed lunch, which generally consisted of half of a sandwich and some loose crisps. Daniel was referred to a paediatrician who prescribed nutritional supplements. Not surprisingly, Daniel was never given this medication. After the school returned in January 2012 following the Christmas holidays, teachers noted that Daniel had bruises and cuts around his neck, as well as fingertip pressure markings around his neck. He also had 2 black eyes. On one occasion, Daniel was observed trying to eat a dirty pancake on the floor. Wuchak and Kreselek instructed Daniel's 2 sisters to lie about what was happening. Between November 2011 and February 2012, Daniel's head and neck injuries were observed on 5 occasions by 3 professionals, yet not one of them informed police or social services. Because he was being starved, Daniel had begun scavenging through school bins for whatever food he could find. One teacher said she watched Daniel walk up to a bin, checked to see if anyone was watching, and then picked out the core of an apple or pear before eating it. She also said that she saw him try and get the last bit of yogurt out of a tube. He scavenged from bins so often that the teachers, and get ready for this, stopped punishing him and gently reminded him of why it was unhealthy to eat from bins. A birthday cake was brought in for a teacher's birthday, and Daniel ate half of the cake. After the school's return from February half-term, teachers noted that he had lost a considerable amount of weight, to the point where, quote, his school uniform was noticeably hanging off him. When questioned about his weight loss, Daniel's mother stated that this weight loss was due to a, quote, rare genetic condition. Staff noted more fingertip pressure marking on his neck and bruising on his face. On February the 10th, 2012, because of concerns about Daniel's weight loss, he was taken to a doctor, Supratik Chakraborty, who prescribed worms medication. Chakraborty described Daniel as, quote, thin, but not wasting away. You may not be surprised to learn that the worming medication was ineffective. Around this time, staff at Daniel's school noticed that he was very pasty with sunken eyes, had become more withdrawn and reserved, and was no longer interacting with his classmates. On March the 1st, 2012, Daniel was observed with injuries to his nose and forehead. He was also seen trying to eat play jelly and dried kidney beans. Furthermore, he was seen trying to eat beans that had been planted as part of an experiment, as well as eating from the bins and scavenging. Staff who observed him described him as, quote, looking like an old man, sad, desperate, and lonely. In what appears to be the last known footage of Daniel alive, his mother collected him from school. In the footage, she walks on ahead with another child, while Daniel tries to catch up with her. At some point after returning from school, Daniel wet himself, for which he was severely beaten as punishment, likely by Kreselek. He suffered a severe head injury that caused axonal damage, ultimately contributing to a subdural hematoma. Wuchak is believed to have witnessed this brutal assault, but had no intention of getting her son any medical attention. In a text message to Kreselek, she stated, quote, he'll get over it by tomorrow. There's no point in calling an ambulance, because that will cause proper problems. Wuchak made internet searches such as, quote, patient in a coma, how to deal with a child with water in the lungs, and how to poison someone with salt. Daniel was left to die alone in his bedroom from Thursday evening until the early hours of Saturday morning, covering a period of around 33 to 36 hours. As for Wuchak and Kreselek, they happily went to sleep on Thursday night. They went shopping the day after. Neighbours who observed the couple's movements said there were no external signs that either was troubled by what had happened. One neighbour stated that Wuchak, quote, didn't have a tear in her eye, despite having lost her only son. Sickeningly, while the couple were interviewed by police, they admitted having sex on the day Daniel died. At 3 a.m. on March the 3rd, 2012, Wuchak finally came to her senses, after realising that Daniel was definitely not going to regain consciousness. She checked on Daniel and noticed that he was not breathing, and was cold to the touch. However, Wuchak and Kreselek did not call the emergency services immediately, as they wanted to get their story straight and rehearse what they were going to tell the authorities. Knowing that there would be questions when people saw Daniel's bruised, battered and emaciated body, the couple deleted their internet search history, hid Daniel's filthy mattress in a cupboard, and tidied the house, before calling 999. When the paramedics arrived, they were horrified by Daniel's physical condition. He had clearly been dead for some time, as his lips were blue, and he was cold to the touch. Suspicions were intensified after Daniel was sent to University Hospital, Coventry, in Warwickshire. When staff examined Daniel's emaciated body, they noticed that he was severely malnourished, battered and bruised. He weighed 1 stone and 7 pounds, around the average weight of an 18-month-old baby. Staff tried to resuscitate him, but it was futile. Daniel Pelka was pronounced dead at 3:50 a.m., less than an hour after his parents alerted the emergency services. The cause of death was a subdural hematoma. The post-mortem established that Daniel had suffered 24 separate injuries, 10 of which were to his head. He also had bruises all over his body and injuries to all 4 limbs. There were abnormally high levels of sodium in his body, undoubtedly linked to the salt poisoning he suffered. Those who noticed Daniel's condition liked his comparison to that of a, quote, concentration camp victim and, quote, a seriously ill cancer patient. The level of malnourishment was unprecedented in the United Kingdom, so severe that Daniel's bones had stopped growing. Not surprisingly, police were alerted immediately. When police searched the family home, they found Daniel's excrement-covered mattress in a storage cupboard. When they examined Daniel's bedroom, they found urine and feces on the floor. Heartbreakingly, they also found fingerprint marks where the door handle should have been, proving that Daniel was trying desperately to escape his confinement. Police were able to retrieve Wuchak and Kreselek's internet search history, despite their best efforts to delete it. An examination of the fridge, freezer and cupboards found that they were all well stocked, meaning Wuchak and Kreselek were consciously withholding food from Daniel as punishment. Wuchak and Kreselek had to explain to Daniel's school why he had died. Wuchak concocted a story that Daniel had been off on Friday because he had been unwell, and that she later found him unconscious, so she summoned Kreselek to perform chest compressions on Daniel. Despite the couple's efforts to convince everyone around them that Daniel had died of natural causes, police were not fooled and knew immediately that Daniel had died as a result of sustained systematic abuse. Magdalena Wuchak and Mariusz Kreselek were arrested and charged with murder and child cruelty. Despite the damning evidence against them, they continued to lie and minimize any responsibility for their role in Daniel's death. Wuchak and Kreselek's trial began in the summer of 2013 in Birmingham Crown Court. They denied the charges of murder but pleaded guilty to child cruelty. In an interesting turn of events, while Wuchak and Kreselek had worked together to conceal Daniel's abuse, in court they turned on each other and blamed one another for what happened to Daniel. Between sessions, however, they were affectionate, leaving court staff in no doubt that Wuchak was in no way frightened or intimidated by her partner. Wuchak claimed that Kreselek would rape and strangle her if she tried to intervene while he was harming Daniel, and if she tried to feed him. Unfortunately for Wuchak, while she had been able to fool teachers and social services, she was not able to fool prosecutors so easily. When asked why she instructed Daniel's school not to give him any food during the day, Wuchak claimed that she was, quote, protecting her son from Kreselek in case he found out that Daniel had eaten and would then punish him. She explained that on the day Daniel died, she had witnessed Kreselek beating Daniel, but that when she had tried to intervene, he knocked her unconscious. She added that she did not call an ambulance immediately because she thought that Daniel was, quote, just asleep and would regain consciousness. It's worth noting that while Wuchak had been a victim of domestic violence, she had been totally complicit in what was happening to Daniel. Not only did she never intervene or try and stop the abuse, she actively colluded and conspired with Kreselek to ensure that nobody knew what was happening. Kreselek eventually had to give his account of what happened on March 1st, 2012. He explained that Daniel had fallen 3 times in the kitchen. Daniel had then lost consciousness and fallen awkwardly while Wuchak was preparing him for a bath. Kreselek went on to explain that Wuchak had prevented him from calling the emergency services for fear that social services would see the bruises on Daniel's body. He also said that Wuchak would shake Daniel when angry and would whip him with a belt. As much as I hate Kreselek as much as you will, I don't doubt that he was being honest here and was simply describing some things that he'd seen. On July the 18th, 2013, Wuchak wept for the first time during the trial, as the jury was shown computerized images of Daniel's emaciated body and the 24 injuries. She admitted that she should have protected her son but failed to do so, commenting that she loved Kreselek too much to stop the abuse. This moment of humanity was not enough to redeem Wuchak, because on August the 2nd, 2013, she and Kreselek were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years. Addressing the couple, presiding judge Mrs. Justice Cox told them, quote, "Daniel's punishments were designed to humiliate. He was a victim of chronic and systematic starvation in a campaign of cruelty." She alluded to how devious the couple had been and how they had colluded to conceal the abuse. The judge stated that they, quote, "carried out a deliberate and cynical deception of teaching, welfare and medical personnel, designed to conceal what was happening, to prevent any help being provided for Daniel." Both defendants received life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years before they could be considered for parole. Eric Pelka, Daniel's biological father, also spoke to the press, in which he expressed anger at Daniel's mistreatment at the hands of Wuchak and Kreselek, and stated that he wanted them to suffer as Daniel had suffered. A serious case review was commissioned to investigate whether chances to save Daniel had been missed. The report, published in September 2013, 2 months after Wuchak and Kreselek were convicted, highlighted the following factors. Police were called to the family home on 26 occasions, many involving domestic violence and alcohol abuse. Excuses made by Daniel's, quote, "controlling mother" were accepted by agencies. Professionals needed to, quote, "think the unthinkable and act upon what they saw rather than accept, quote, parental versions." Daniel's, quote, "voice was not heard because English was not his first language and he lacked confidence. No record of, quote, any conversation held with Daniel about his home life, his experiences outside of school, or of his relationships with his siblings, mother, and her partner." None of the agencies involved could have predicted Daniel's death. There were, quote, "committed attempts by his school and health workers to address his, quote, health and behavioural issues in the months before his death, but, quote, too many opportunities missed more urgent and purposeful interventions. 2 of those chances were when Daniel was taken to an accident and emergency department with injuries." The review also found that Daniel was, quote, "invisible at times, and that no professional tried hard enough to speak to him." No one was disciplined as a result of Daniel's death. On July the 14th, 2015, Magdalena Wuchak was found hanged in her prison cell in HMP Foston Hall in Foston, Derbyshire. An inquest found that she had hanged herself on the evening of what would have been Daniel's 8th birthday. On January the 27th, 2016, Mariusz Kreselek was found dead in his prison cell in HMP Full Sutton in East Yorkshire. It was established that he had suffered a heart attack. It was also discovered that he had refused medical attention after complaining of chest pains, for fear that people would recognise him. Although Daniel died on March the 3rd, 2012, he was not laid to rest until 18 months after his death. Eric Pelka could not afford to have his son flown home to Poland, so a London funeral firm agreed to cover the costs of repatriation. Daniel's body was kept in a UK mortuary after his death. Daniel was buried on September the 3rd, 2013, in Łódź, his father's hometown. While Daniel lived a short and miserable existence, it is reassuring that he is now no longer suffering and can rest in peace for all eternity.